The first thing I noticed that morning was the sound of the wind, pushing its way between the crooked boards of the saloon's outer wall. It wasn't a strong wind, not the kind that rattled shutters loose or sent hats tumbling down the street, but the kind that seemed to carry whispers with it. Out here, in a town that barely had a name on the maps, every sound seemed louder than it ought to be. The whistle of the train 5 miles downriver, the bray of a mule in the livery stable, even the scrape of a chair being pulled across the wooden floor, it all carried. Folks said it was because the land was too wide and empty, so the silence swallowed everything until it came back sharper than before. Whatever the reason, it made the village feel like it was always holding its breath. That morning, I had only meant to pass through. My boots were worn, my pockets near empty, and my mind set on nothing more than reaching the rail line before the week was out. The village was like many others that dotted the frontier, dusty streets lined with a scatter of wooden buildings. A church with a steeple that leaned slightly to one side, and the faint smell of coal smoke from the blacksmith's forge. Children darted past me, barefoot and wild, chasing each other with sticks that pretended to be rifles. Women hung wash from sagging lines strung between porches, their voices rising above the squeak of the clothespins. Life went on, slow and simple, as though the world hadn't changed since the first settlers broke ground here. But the truth was, change was never far. The telegraph poles that stood like sentinels along the road brought in word of wars, treaties, rail contracts, and the movements of men who believed they could own land just by setting foot on it. Not everyone agreed with that. Some folks had been here long before fences, long before surveyors, long before the word territory had been stamped on paper. That tension lived in the air, though most pretended it didn't. I'd stopped. Near the trading post when I first saw her, she was standing alone at the edge of town, wrapped in a blanket the color of clay and dust. Her dark hair pulled back in braids that framed her face. There was something in the way she held herself, proud but wary, like she expected at any moment to be driven off. Most folks walked past her as though she wasn't there. A few spared her a glance, the kind you give when you think someone might ask for something you can't or won't give. The truth was, the day wasn't particularly cold. But I'd been carrying an old coat with me, heavier than I needed, and patched at the elbows. I could have sold it for a few coins in the next town. Instead, I found myself stepping toward her without much thought, pulling it from my pack and holding it out. She looked at me long and hard, like she was measuring something in my face. Finally, she took it. No word, just a nod, but the kind of nod that meant more than most sentences. I'd figured that was the end of it. A simple gesture. Nothing to hold on to. But later, as the sun began to sink and the street lamps were being lit one by one, she came back. This time she didn't just stand on the edge of town. She walked straight up to me where I sat outside the saloon, a cup of bitter coffee in my hand. Her blanket was gone. The coat hung loose over her shoulders, too big, the sleeves hiding her hands. Her voice was quiet but firm when she spoke. "You gave me your coat. Now you must give me more." I blinked, thinking I'd misheard her. But her eyes didn't waver. "What more?" I asked. "Your name," she said first. "And your promise?" "You will marry me." The laughter from the saloon behind me seemed to freeze in my ears. The men at the poker table went on with their game. The fiddler scraped out another tune, but to me the world narrowed down to her face, her words, and the heavy silence that followed. I didn't know her name. I didn't know where she had come from or why she would ask such a thing. And yet there she stood, as if she had simply spoken a truth that could not be argued with. Something stirred in me, then part unease, part curiosity, and part something I didn't yet dare to name. Life out here was already tangled enough without adding vows to a stranger, let alone one who carried with her the weight of a people most of the town pretended not to see. The longer I looked at her, the more I felt the eyes of others turning my way. A couple of men on the porch of the Mercantile leaned forward, whispering between themselves. The barkeep paused in wiping his glasses. Even the preacher, who had been making his evening rounds, slowed his step. In a town this small, news traveled faster than smoke on a dry wind. And already I could feel the story forming, a drifter giving his coat to an Apache woman, nor coming back to claim a marriage. She waited. She didn't beg. Not in the way a body begs for food or shelter, but her words were steady, and her gaze didn't waver. "You gave me what was yours," she said. Softer now. This makes a bond. You cannot walk away from it. I wanted to speak, to tell her she was mistaken, that a coat was just a coat. But something in me hesitated. Maybe it was the way her voice carried the weight of something older than law, older than the planks of the church or the ink on the land deeds. Maybe it was because, for the first time in months, someone was looking at me as though my choices mattered. The wind picked up again, swirling dust across the street. A lantern flickered on the saloon wall, casting long shadows across the porch. The world seemed to lean in, waiting for my answer. I opened my mouth, ready to speak, but before I could, the sound of hoofbeats thundered down the road. A rider came fast from the north, his horse lathered, his coat torn, his face pale with dust and fear. He pulled up hard in front of the saloon, nearly toppling from the saddle. "Raiders," he gasped. "They're coming this way." The crowd stirred. Chairs scraped, voices rose, the poker game forgotten. Men rushed for rifles, women pulled children inside. The whole town shifted in an instant from idle ease to sharp-edged fear. She was still, standing in front of me, calm as stone, her hand hidden in the sleeve of my coat. Her eyes never left mine. Even as shouts filled the street and the church bell began to toll, "You must choose now," she said, and with the wind carrying the sound of the rider's warning into the night, I realized that my life, quiet and unremarkable until that morning, it just turned onto a road I had never meant to walk. I didn't yet know whether it would lead me to ruin or to something far greater. But I knew this much. Nothing in that little American village would ever be the same again. The bell went on ringing, slow and hollow, while the rider's words poured into the night like water from a split barrel. Folks scattered toward doorways. A boy stumbled on the steps of the mercantile and was hauled inside by his mother. The blacksmith slammed his forge door and shouted for his apprentice to fetch water buckets. The sheriff came out of his office, pulling a long coat over his shoulders, his face set in a way that said this wasn't the first time trouble had come down the road. He looked at me, and then at the woman in my coat, as if measuring what both of us were worth in a pinch. "From the north, you said?" he asked the rider. The rider nodded, gulping air. "Dust for miles. Saw 5 at least, maybe more." He tried to go on, but his throat seized with the effort. Someone pressed a dipper into his hands, and he drank like a man who had crossed the whole desert. The sheriff turned to the rest of us, his voice firm and practical, the way you talk to a mule that's about to spook. "All right, lamps out on the far end. Keep the street clear. Get the children into the church basement. You," he pointed at me, "you look steady enough to shoot. If you've got a rifle, fetch it. If you don't, stand near someone who does. Mind you, don't fire the first shot unless I say so." Didn't move. Not because I was stubborn, but because the woman's eyes held me fast. "You must answer," she said barely above a whisper, "before they come." I almost told her we should talk later, after whatever danger had passed. But there was no later in her face. Only a steady patience, like the hills beyond the river. I felt the weight of the choice like a hand on my shoulder. The sheriff's boots creaked across the boards. He looked back at us with a flicker of annoyance, then went on to bark orders at the men gathering on the porch. "What does the coat mean?" I asked her, my voice low. "Why are you asking me for something as big as marriage on the strength of that?" Her eyes shifted to the last smear of daylight on the horizon. "Where I come from," she said, "a gift given when there is no bargain binds 2 stories together. Not always the kind you think, not always man and woman. Sometimes it is protection, sometimes passage. Sometimes a promise that outlives both people. Your coat was warm. It was offered without price. It means you opened a road." The wind pressed the coat against her frame, and I saw how it draped. The hem brushing her calves, the sleeves hiding her hands like a child playing in a grown man's Sunday clothes, made me want to smile, and yet there was nothing light in her voice. "Who are the riders?" I asked. "Men who hunt what does not belong to them," she said. "Iron, horses, stories, names. They come when the moon is thin. They take what is loose. A shadow crossed the preacher's face as he hurried past, shooing a knot of boys into the church. The telegraph operator ducked back into his office to send a wire down the line toward the next village, the clicking of the key quick and nervous. In the dusk, the town looked like a painting dry-brushed with Worry, the old American village of the late 1800s. All planks and porch rails and coal smoke and a future trying to push its way in. "I don't have much," I said. "A bedroll. A few coins, a bad habit of moving on. I'm not the sort of man you bind your story to." She tilted her head as if that answer were a little foolish. "You had enough to give," she said. "That is more than most." The sheriff sent 2 men to the north end with rifles and told the barkeep to douse the lamps. Darkness flowed across the street like spilled ink. Only the lantern at the livery and the low glow at the forge remained. Folks whispered words like frontier raid, trading post trouble, railroad fence line, treaty talk. The blacksmith's hammer, still hot from the day's work, cooled to quiet metal in a bucket of water. I wanted to ask the woman her name, but I worried how the question might land. Names can be a kind of theft if you take them before they're given. "If I promise," I said, measuring each word. "What does that mean for you?" "For me?" She lifted her chin toward the dark hills. "It means we stand on the same side when the wind changes. It means if voices rise against me, yours will rise too. It means if I go, you follow. If you fall, I stay." There was a warmth in those words that scared me worse than the thought of any rider. I had not stood on anyone's side for a long time. The rail line was my measure how far to the next job, the next town, the next bed. I had left more places than I'd stayed. I had grown too used to eating alone and telling myself I liked it. The rider, steadier now, looked at the coat on her shoulders and frowned. "She with you?" he asked me. "I don't know yet," I said. "Best know quick," he muttered, and then he spat into the dust as if to empty something bitter from his mouth. He wasn't unkind. He was just a man who had seen dust turn into trouble too many times to pretend it would be anything else. We moved with the flow of the crowd down to the end of the street, where the earth dipped toward the riverbed. The sheriff lined us along. The hitching rails set 2 men behind a water trough and told the rest to keep their breathing even. The late summer air had a faint sweetness to it, as if the dry stalks in the fields were holding on to one last memory of rain. Somewhere. A dog barked once and then thought better of it. The woman stood beside me without asking permission. I heard the fabric of the coat rustle when she folded her arms inside the sleeves. "You know this land?" I asked. "I know enough," she said. "The mesquite hollows, the dry arroyo, the way a horse sounds when the rider is tired." "You think they'll come through the riverbed?" She nodded. "Soft ground, hooves leave less mark, and the moon is thin." Her certainty calmed me more than the sheriff's rules. I adjusted my stance and studied the pale ribbon of sand where the river ran out in summer. After a while, the sound of the telegraph key died, and the only noise left was the hush of the wind in the cottonwoods and the soft chafe of leather as men shifted their weight. A murmur went down the line like a hand passed along. Dust lifted from the low bank, a faint, steady puff. Shapes nudged out of the dark and then back again, like fish near the surface of a pond. The sheriff raised his hand, and we all held our breath. The woman leaned closer, and for a moment I could smell the trace of sage and wood smoke in her hair. The road I had opened by giving a coat now felt like a bridge I was standing on with no idea what lay on the other side. The shapes in the dark paused. One horse whickered. Another stamped. Then, without a word, the dust settled. The shapes melted back into the night. The line of us stayed still for a long, brittle minute. I could hear my own heartbeat, big and hard in my ears. "Not yet," the sheriff said. "They're testing us." He sent 2 men to circle around the back lots and watch the alley that ran behind the trading post. He posted a guard at the livery, sent a boy to keep the bell rope ready. We kept our eyes on the riverbed, while the town shifted around us like a sleeper who can't settle. Somewhere between all that, the woman's hand slipped free of the sleeve and found mine. Her fingers were cool and strong. I didn't pull away. Why? Here, I asked. There are bigger places to take from. She didn't answer at once. Then she said, because your village thinks it is too small to matter. That is when the taking is easiest. A narrow street, lamps that can be put out, a sheriff with too few men. She paused and her fingers tightened on mine. And because they heard I came here. The words landed like a dropped stone. Who heard? The men who follow iron and gold and rumors, she said. They followed me before. I left to lead them away from my kin. But rumor travels faster than horses. I thought this place might be a quiet bend in the river. I was wrong. I looked at her in the dark, trying to see more than a small outline. In a big coat, why were they following you? She turned her face toward me, and even in the thin light I could see the calm in her eyes. Because I carry a story that is not theirs, she said. Because I refuse to trade it for coin. Is that why you asked me for a promise? It is why I asked you not to let go. The sheriff moved along the line and stopped near us. If you two have business, keep it quiet, he murmured, and keep her close. Some of the boys are nervous. Nervous men make poor choices. He tipped his hat, not unkind, and moved on. We waited while the night loosened around us. Folks began to drift back from the doorways. The blacksmith opened his forge again, just enough to throw a little heat against the chill. The barkeep lit a small lamp behind the bar and poured coffee that tasted like bark. Someone laughed too loud and then hushed himself, as if afraid his own voice might draw trouble. I felt the woman's hand leave mine. She stepped a pace away and looked toward the hills again. Tell me your name, I said gently now. She studied me for a long moment. You may call me what the river calls the stones, she said. It says their true names only under the water. That's not much to go on, I said, and before I could stop myself, I smiled. She didn't smile back, but something in her face softened. You gave me a coat, she said. I will give you a name when the time fits it. Names are like tools. You don't hand them to a man before he knows what he is building. A flicker of light came from the north ridge, like a match struck and smothered. The sheriff swore under his breath. They're not gone, he said. I sent a man to wake the freight agent by the rail spur. He told the telegraph operator, too. Keep his ear open for an answer from the next station, though the line had been quiet since full dark. Somewhere a coyote yipped, thin and lonely. I thought of the coat on her shoulders, the gift that had bound us before I knew it was binding. Me. I thought of the long road that had taught me to keep my feet moving and my heart locked up, and how a single sentence, "You will marry me," had made the road buckle. I thought of the old American village in the late 1800s pressing at the doors, like weather, and of all the words folks used to make sense of change: settlement, progress, treaty, title, homestead. Words that didn't know how to measure a person's story. Your promise, she said, so soft it almost wasn't sound. Do you have an answer? I looked at the sheriff's back, at the lamplight on the forge, at the dark line of the riverbed. A promise made on a night like this, with riders in the dark and strangers listening, wouldn't be something I could tuck in a pocket and forget. If I spoke, it would move the ground under both of us. I opened my mouth and the church bell gave. A single, heavy stroke. We all flinched. A shape detached from the shadow by the livery and stepped into the lamp's thin glow. He was not one of ours. He wore a broad hat pulled low and a scarf at his neck that looked red even in the weak light. He raised both hands, palms out, showing they were empty, yet the way he held them said he was not the kind of man who stayed empty for long. Evening, said voice, easy as a card trick. We come for talk, not trouble. The sheriff's rifle stayed level. Talk fast. The stranger's smile didn't reach his eyes. Word goes you got something here that belongs elsewhere, he said. Aim to fetch it back.
Please.
Gaze slid past the sheriff to rest on the coat draped over the woman's shoulders. For an instant, the street seemed to tilt. The woman didn't move. There is nothing here that belongs to you, she said. The stranger's smile thinned. Ma'am, you'd be surprised what belongs to a man with the right papers. He tapped the pocket of his vest like there might be a deed in it, or a warrant, or just a scrap of lies dressed up like law. We looked back at the sheriff. We don't want your village. Want the tale she's carrying. When handed over, and we'll ride. A shiver went through the line of men. The telegraph key began to click again, a slow stutter, like a bug on a windowsill. The blacksmith's hand closed on his hammer. The preacher stepped onto the church porch and then froze, unsure whether a word of scripture would help or hurt. The woman took one small step, so the coat swung, and her shoulder brushed mine. She didn't look at me, but I could feel the question rise between us anyway. As steady as the river's hush. "Your promise," she said again. "Yeah." And the stranger tilted his head to listen. I drew a breath that felt like the first one I'd taken. "In months, if I give it," I said, my voice scratchy and low. "There's no turning from it." "That is the meaning of giving," she said. The stranger's hand drifted to his belt, casual as a yawn. The sheriff's finger tightened on the trigger guard. The lamp by the livery hissed as a moth found the flame and vanished in a snow of ash. I didn't know if the riders were 10 or 20, if the riverbed hid rifles or just empty air. I didn't know what story the woman carried or what it was worth to men who followed rumors in the dark. I only knew that the wind had shifted, and with it, my life. I opened my mouth to answer, and from the ridge above the north road there came a sound like a match strike grown into thunder one shot. And then, another, and the night broke open. The first shot cracked the air wide open, echoing down the narrow street and bouncing off the false fronts of the saloon and the general store. Horses shrieked in their stalls at the livery. The stranger's hand snapped to his revolver, though the sheriff's rifle was already aimed at dead center on his chest. For a moment no one moved. The smoke from that shot curled across the ridge like a warning, and everyone knew more would follow. The woman in my coat did not flinch. Her hand slid back into the sleeve as if she meant to disappear inside the gift I had given her. The sheriff barked for calm, but men shifted, eyes darting between the stranger and the dark ridge above us. The blacksmith's hammer was lifted like a weapon, though it was not iron he needed to strike. Tension hung heavier than the night air. From the alley came the thump of boots, and two more figures appeared. Their hats were pulled low, rifles slung loose across their shoulders. They did not hide who they were. Raiders, drifters, maybe even hired men working off a promise of gold. They moved as if the town was already theirs to walk through. The sheriff swung his rifle between them, but the odds were shifting fast, and everyone on our side felt it. The stranger with the red scarf lowered his voice, still smiling, though his eyes were sharp. "That shot up there was only to show we're not alone. We've got the ridge, the riverbed, and patience enough to outlast you. Give the woman over. We'll leave you to your peace." The sheriff spat into the dirt, buying time. He knew as well as the rest of us that a fight here would leave the village broken, no matter who won. But giving her up was no choice at all, not with her standing steady at my side, not with the meaning she carried in her silence. I felt her eyes on me. Though she did not speak, her calm was unsettling, like she had known all along this moment would come. I wanted to ask her again what story she carried that made armed men ride through the dark, but the answer seemed tangled with more danger than I was ready to hear. While the standoff held, small things shifted in the background. The preacher whispered a prayer over the children hidden in the church basement. The telegraph operator tapped a desperate signal to the next town, his hands shaking with speed. The barkeep quietly loaded a scattergun behind his counter. The village itself seemed to be holding its breath, every board and nail straining to stay upright under the weight of what was coming. The woman's gaze slid past me to the men in the street. "You say you want what belongs elsewhere," she said to the stranger, "but a story cannot be carried like iron or gold. A story stays with the one who lives it." The stranger chuckled, the sound too easy for the tightness of the moment. "That may be so, ma'am, but a story can be traded, can be taken. Folks pay for less every day." He tapped his vest pocket again. "And I got men who'll make sure it's ours one way or another." Behind us, a different voice rose. The rider who had brought the warning was speaking to the sheriff in a hurried whisper, pointing toward the north fields. The sheriff's jaw set hard as he listened. Then he turned and shouted, "They've split their force. Half at the ridge, half circling the long way. They mean to box us in." A shiver went down the line of townsfolk. Some shifted closer to doorways. Others gripped rifles tighter. The blacksmith swore under his breath, low and bitter. It wasn't just a raid anymore. It was a siege, laid out plain as the stars overhead. In the thick of it all, I felt caught. Between two pulls, the weight of the woman's promise and the raw fear of the fight about to break loose. The stranger's eyes slid back to me, narrowing as if he sensed the bond already forming. "You," he said, pointing a gloved hand. "You're the one she's chosen. You gave her that coat. That makes you part of her bargain. You want to? Play hero? Then you'll share her fate?" The words sliced close to the bone. He was right in one sense. I had stepped into this the moment I offered warmth on a cold evening. I wanted to say it was nothing, just kindness. But the look in her eyes told me it was more, and pretending otherwise would be a lie. At that moment, the sheriff cut across. The tension, voice booming to everyone. "Nobody fires unless I say we keep our line. We protect our own." His hand trembled just slightly on the rifle, though he held it steady enough for the stranger to notice. The stranger tilted his head, mocking almost, then raised his voice so it carried across the street. "You think you can protect her? Can't protect yourselves. Every nail in your houses is ours if we want it. Every rail spike, every mule, every sack of flour." He pointed at the woman, and her story most of all. The woman finally stepped forward, the hem of the coat, brushing the dust. "You do not own me," she said, and her voice carried with a strength that made the men beside me stir. She stood small but unbroken, and it made the stranger's grin falter for the first time. The standoff stretched until the sound of another shot broke it.
"Out this one closer."
From the backlots near the freight station. The sheriff shouted orders. Men scrambling to cover different angles. Fear pressed in harder. The raiders were tightening the noose. In the confusion, I felt a hand grip my arm. The rider who had first warned us leaned close. "You don't know what you've stepped into," he said. His eyes were dark with urgency. "She's carrying more than a story. She's carrying something men would kill whole towns for. You need to decide quick whether you're with her or not, because they won't stop." Wanted to demand answers, but he was gone before I could speak, slipping into the shadows to cover the north road. His words hung with me, heavier than the rifle I carried. The woman, the raiders, the quartet was no longer a simple choice of standing with or without her. It was a choice that could turn the whole course of this village's night, maybe even its future. From the ridge came the call of a horn, long and low, followed by the shuffle of horses. Shadows moved in the moonlight like waves against the hills. The raiders were ready to press harder, and our little town, caught between fear and defiance, braced for whatever storm was rolling toward us, and still, at the heart of it, she stood, close enough for me to hear her steady breath, waiting for my promise. The horn on the ridge gave another long cry, the kind that sent every man's stomach tight. Horses pawed the earth, and shadows thickened until it seemed the whole hillside was alive with movement. The sheriff barked orders, voice rough, but even he couldn't hide the fear in it. Men hurried to reload, some dropping cartridges with shaking hands. Mothers hushed children inside doorways. The church bell swayed but did not ring, as if the rope itself feared drawing more attention. The stranger in the red scarf stepped closer into the lamplight. His smile sharpened into something colder. "This is your last chance," he said. "You give her over, you all get to see the morning sun fuse, and the ridge will roll down on you like thunder." He flicked his hand, and in the distance, the silhouettes of riders adjusted, readying for the charge. The message was clear. He could unleash them with a word. I felt the woman's sleeve brush against me. She said nothing, only stood with that same steady calm, though her eyes stayed fixed on the line of horsemen above. The coat I had given her seemed too thin now, too small against the weight of what was pressing in. Still, she wore it like armor. The sheriff planted his boots firm. In the dust, rifle raised. "Nobody in this town belongs to you," he said. His voice carried down the street, echoed against clapboard walls and shuttered windows. It was a brave line, but his knuckles showed white on the stock. The stranger chuckled, low and mocking. "Brave words, Sheriff. Bravery won't hold when the fire starts." He tipped his hat, and a lantern flared up on the ridge. More riders revealed themselves, a line of pale shapes with rifles glinting in the light. The town gasped as one, the sound almost louder than the wind. From the backlots came another shot. It shattered a window of the mercantile, spraying glass. Into the street. Folks screamed and ducked. The line of defenders wavered. The blacksmith swore and gripped his hammer tighter, eyes darting between the sheriff and the ridge. Fear was pulling men apart faster than orders could hold them together. The woman leaned closer to me, her voice just for my ear. They test your courage. But the true test comes when they break the line. You must be ready. Her tone was not frightened, only certain, as though she had already walked this path before. My mouth was dry. I wanted to ask her again what story she carried that made this night unfold the way it had. But there was no space for questions now. Every heartbeat felt like a hammer strike. Every breath carried the weight of what I had not yet promised her. The horn sounded again, sharper, closer. The riders shifted as one, horses snorting clouds of steam into the cold night. The stranger raised his hand high, ready to drop it. In that small motion lay the difference between a town standing or burning. The telegraph key rattled from the operator's office. Desperate and fast, but whether anyone would hear in time was a hope too thin to lean on. The preacher clutched his Bible at the church door, whispering words that mingled with the crackle of the forge fire. Somewhere a baby cried, and the sound carried far in the tense silence. The stranger's hand hovered. I felt the woman's. Fingers close around mine inside the sleeve of the coat. Now, she said, her voice steady, you must choose. My heart slammed hard enough to shake my ribs. The sheriff shouted for the line to hold. The blacksmith lifted his hammer high. The raiders on the ridge lowered their rifles. Dust stirred as horses tensed to charge, and in that breath, balanced on the edge of fire. Every soul in the village knew the night was about to break. The stranger's hand dropped, and the ridge erupted with thunder. Hooves pounded, rifles cracked, and the sky filled with fire and smoke. The raiders poured down the hillside like a flood, shouting, waving guns, their horses tearing through the dust. The sheriff roared for us to hold the line, and rifles from our side answered in a volley that split the night. Sparks burst from metal striking stone, windows shattered, and the air grew thick with powder. The town was no longer waiting, it was fighting for its breath. I pulled the woman behind a water trough as bullets tore splinters from the hitching posts. She clutched my hand once more, eyes steady, even as the world around us shook. Stay with me, she whispered. Her voice was not a plea but a command, as though she had always known my fate was tied to hers. The sheriff stood firm at the center of the street, rifle barking again and again, shouting orders above the roar. The blacksmith swung his hammer at a raider who had broken through, knocking him from his horse. Townsfolk, who only hours earlier had been sweeping porches and lighting lamps, now fought with pitchforks, shotguns, or whatever iron they could. Fear bound us, but something stronger began to take its place. Resolve. The stranger rode straight into the fray, red scarf streaming, his revolver spitting flame. He called out for the woman, his voice rising above the gunfire, promising mercy to no one. He wanted her, and everyone knew it. The raider's fury was not for food or coin, but for the secret she carried. We scrambled through the chaos toward the church, its heavy doors still open for shelter. Inside, the preacher guarded children and mothers, his prayers breaking into shouts as stray bullets cracked the siding. I helped her inside, but she stopped, turning back to face the battle. If I hide, they will never stop, she said. If I stand, their story ends here. Her words caught me in the chest. I had tried to deny the pull of her mystery, but the truth was clear. This fight was not only for a town, but for what she bore within her. I tightened my grip on the rifle and nodded, then I'll stand with you. The raiders pressed harder. Fire licked from the livery, smoke rising into the night sky. Horses screamed, men shouted, and every corner of the street was alive with desperation. Yet even as the ridge threatened to overwhelm us, the sheriff rallied the defenders with a fierce cry, and the townsfolk answered with another volley. The raiders staggered, surprised by the strength of resistance. In the heart of the fight, the stranger locked eyes with me. His grin faded, replaced by cold anger, pointed his revolver. But before he could fire, the blacksmith's hammer crashed into his horse's flank, sending both man and beast tumbling. The red scarf was lost in the dust, and the stranger scrambled to his feet. Pistol raised once more. The woman stepped forward, coat flaring in the wind, her voice rising above the chaos. "Enough," she cried. Her words cut sharper than any. "Bullet." The raiders paused, just for a breath, hearing the certainty in her tone. She stood tall, unbroken, her gaze fixed on the stranger. "You think my story is something you can take? But a story is not yours to steal. It belongs to the one who carries it, and to those who choose to share it." The stranger's face twisted with rage. He fired, but the shot went wide, struck. Aside by the sheriff's bullet in the same instant, the force knocked the stranger back, his pistol flying into the dirt. He staggered, clutching his arm, eyes wild. The raiders, seeing their leader falter, wavered. Some shouted for retreat, others pressed forward, but the spell of their charge had broken. The sheriff raised his rifle high. "This is our town. Want it? You'll pay for every inch." His words ignited the defenders, and together they surged forward. The raiders broke ranks, the hillside that had once delivered them, now their only escape. Gunfire faded as they fled into the dark, leaving smoke, dust, and silence behind. When it was over, the street lay torn apart but still standing. Flames were beaten back, wounded tended, families reunited. The sheriff leaned on his rifle, blood at his sleeve, but his eyes still fierce. The blacksmith wiped soot from his brow, hammer heavy in his grip. Around them, townsfolk began to breathe again, the weight of fear lifting with the dawn that edged over the hills. The stranger, bound by rope and stripped of his scarf, sat against the jailhouse wall, eyes burning with hatred. He spat into the dirt but said nothing. His men had abandoned him, leaving him to face the judgment of those he had tried to break. The sheriff promised he would stand trial, though his fate was already sealed in the eyes of the village. The woman stood quietly in the center of it all, coat around her shoulders torn but still whole. She looked at me, her expression softening. "For the first time, you kept your promise," she said. Her voice carried gratitude and something deeper, something that made the scars of the night feel bearable. I asked her then what story she carried, what truth had driven men to ride through fire to claim it. She reached into the coat's lining and pulled out a small book, worn and bound with leather. She held it out but did not let go. "This is not just my story," she said. "It is the story of those who walked before me, of my people, of the lands taken and the lives lost. It is memory, it is truth, and it is hope. That is why they wanted it, and that is why I cannot give it away." I did not take the book. Instead, I placed my hand over hers and nodded. "Then it stays with you," she smiled, faint but real, and slipped it back into the coat. For the first time since I met her, I felt I understood not the full weight of her past, but the strength of her resolve. And in that, I knew why I had chosen to stand with her, why the fight had been worth every risk. The town, scarred but unbroken, began to rebuild as the sun rose over the hills. Smoke still curled from broken windows, but the sound of hammers soon followed, not as weapons now, but as tools of renewal. Children emerged from the church basement, blinking at the light, their laughter hesitant but growing. The preacher offered thanks aloud, his voice steady now. As for me, I stayed beside the woman in the coat, watching the dawn paint the street gold. She did not ask me again to marry her, nor did I press the matter. What bound us was not spoken, vows. But the choice we had made together in the dark, the choice to stand when fear said run. The sheriff clasped my shoulder, nodding with respect. "You did right," he said simply, before turning back to the work of mending what had been broken. The blacksmith, weary but smiling, promised the next bell he forged would ring louder than any horn. When the day settled, silence replaced the echoes of battle. The woman and I walked beyond the edge of town. The hills stretched wide, the horizon endless. She paused, looking back once, then forward again. The story continues, she said, and I knew she was right. The night had ended, the danger passed, but the weight of her story remained. A thread that tied us not just to each other, but to the truth that no raider, no stranger, could ever claim as we walked into the new day. I felt the dust beneath my boots, the warmth of the sun on my face, and the quiet strength of the woman beside me. The story that had begun with a single coat had become something greater, a lesson in loyalty, in courage, and in the power of standing firm when the world tries to take what is not its own. And so, it ended not with silence, but with hope. The town lived on, the people endured, and the story, the one worth carrying, remained safe in the hands of the woman who bore it, and in the hearts of those who had chosen to defend it.